The sound of a child crying can pierce through the thickest walls and the busiest minds, but in the sterile waiting room of Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, it seemed to echo off every surface until it became a symphony of heartbreak. Margaret Chen pressed her manicured fingers against her temples, her Hermès Tilde diaresis bag clutched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. Across from her, 8-year-old Lily sat rigid in the uncomfortable plastic chair, her small body trembling as silent tears streamed down her cheeks. "Sweetie, please," Margaret whispered, her voice cracking despite her best efforts to maintain composure. "The doctors said everything will be fine. It's just a routine procedure." But Lily couldn't hear the reassurance in her mother's voice over the roar of her own panic. The little girl had been born with a severe anxiety disorder, and hospitals with their antiseptic smell and buzzing fluorescent lights were her worst nightmare. Margaret had tried everything: bribes with new toys, promises of ice cream, even bringing Lily's favorite stuffed animal. Nothing worked. In the corner of the waiting room, Marcus Williams looked up from the worn paperback novel he'd been pretending to read. He was there with his 9-year-old son, Jamal, who was getting his cast removed after breaking his arm in a skateboarding accident. Marcus had taken the day off from his job at the auto repair shop, a luxury he couldn't really afford as a single father, but some things mattered more than money. The crying had been going on for 20 minutes now, and Marcus watched as the well-dressed woman across the room grew more desperate with each passing moment. He'd seen that look before, the helplessness of a parent who would move mountains for their child but couldn't figure out how to move this one small obstacle. "Dad," Jamal whispered, tugging on his father's worn flannel shirt. "That little girl is really scared." Marcus nodded, his heart aching for both the child and her mother. He'd been where that woman was, feeling like he was failing his son every time he couldn't make the hurt go away. But before he could decide whether to intervene, Jamal was already walking across the room. The boy knelt down in front of Lily's chair and began moving his hands in fluid, graceful gestures. Margaret looked up, startled, as her daughter's sobs gradually quieted. Lily was staring at Jamal with wide, curious eyes as his fingers danced through the air. "What is he doing?" Margaret asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus approached slowly, not wanting to break whatever spell his son was weaving. "Sign language," he said softly. "Jamal's been learning it for the past 2 years." Margaret felt her throat tighten. "My mother was deaf," she said, the words tumbling out unexpectedly. "She tried to teach me when I was little, but..." She trailed off, watching as Jamal continued signing to Lily. "But my father thought it would hold me back professionally." He made her stop. The revelation hung in the air between them as Jamal's hands continued their gentle conversation with Lily. The little girl had stopped crying entirely now, her attention completely captured by this new form of communication. "What's he saying to her?" Margaret asked. Marcus smiled, his chest swelling with pride. "He's telling her about the time he was scared of getting his tonsils out. He said the nurses here are like superheroes in scrubs, and they have magical hands that make everything better." Lily giggled at the first sound of joy she'd made all morning. Her small hands moved tentatively, copying some of Jamal's gestures. "She knows some signs?" Marcus asked, surprised. Margaret nodded, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "My mother taught her a few words before she passed away last year. Basic things like I love you and beautiful and brave." Lily was only 2 then, but somehow she remembered. Jamal's eyes lit up with understanding, and he began signing more deliberately. This time, Margaret caught some of the words her mother's lessons, buried under years of corporate meetings and profit margins, suddenly surfacing like artifacts from a forgotten life. "He's telling her she's brave," Margaret translated, her voice thick with emotion. "He's saying, oh God, He's saying that brave girls help other brave girls. Lily was sitting up straighter now, her tear-stained face brightening as she watched Jamal's hands. She signed something back to him, and he grinned widely before responding with animated gestures that made her laugh. "What did she say?" Marcus asked his son when Jamal returned to their seats. "She asked if I was brave too," Jamal said. "I told her I was scared when I broke my arm, but that being scared doesn't mean you're not brave. It just means you're human." Margaret stared at this 9-year-old boy who had somehow accomplished what she, with all her resources and connections, couldn't do. "Where did you learn to sign?" she asked. "Mrs. Patterson at our community center," Jamal replied. "She's deaf, and she teaches kids for free on Saturdays. Dad brings me every week." Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. "It's not much, but I figured every skill he learns makes him stronger, you know." Margaret looked at this man in his work clothes and his son in his thrift store sneakers, and she realized she was in the presence of something she'd spent years chasing in boardrooms and country clubs: a genuine wealth. Not the kind measured in stock options or property values, but the kind that could reach across a room and heal a frightened child's heart. Lily Chen, a nurse, appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand. Lily looked up at her mother, then back at Jamal. The boy gave her an encouraging smile and signed something that made her nod firmly. She stood up, walked over to Jamal, and hugged him tightly. "Thank you," she whispered in his ear, then signed the words as well. As they followed the nurse down the hallway, Margaret turned back to Marcus. "I run a non-profit foundation," she said quickly. "We fund educational programs. Would you? Could I talk to you about expanding Mrs. Patterson's sign language program?" Marcus blinked in surprise. "Mom, you don't have toe." "Yes, I do," Margaret interrupted. "My mother spent her whole life trying to build bridges between two worlds. Today, your son finished what she started." 3 months later, the Patterson Center for Deaf Education occupied a beautiful new building on the east side of Philadelphia. The grand opening ceremony was small but meaningful, Mrs. Patterson cutting a ribbon while dozens of children, both hearing and deaf, cheered in sign language. Marcus wore a new suit that Margaret had insisted on buying him, though he still felt more comfortable in his work clothes. Jamal and Lily had become unlikely best friends, meeting every Saturday for sign language classes and every Wednesday for what they called brave practice, helping other nervous kids in various waiting rooms around the city. Margaret stood beside Marcus as they watched their children teach a group of teenagers some basic signs. "My mother would have loved this," she said softly. "She would have been proud of you," Marcus replied. "Taking something beautiful from your past and making it grow." Margaret smiled, her hands moving in the graceful gestures her mother had tried so hard to teach her years ago. "She always said that love speaks every language," she signed, the movements feeling like coming home. In that moment, watching their children bridge worlds with nothing more than open hearts and moving hands, both parents understood that the greatest inheritances aren't money or property, they're the simple, powerful gifts we pass from one generation to the next. Sometimes it takes a frightened child and a brave boy to remind us that the most valuable things in life can't be purchased, only shared. And in a language that her mother never got to finish teaching her, Margaret finally learned the most important lesson of all, that kindness needs no translation, and love speaks fluent hope in every gesture of an outstretched hand.